And we are back. This is A.R. Tales, aka the A.R.T podcast. I am your host, Carolyn R. Not your usual host, actually. This is A.R. Mirabal's podcast, but it's a special turn of events because I get to interview him. So he is in the hot seat. Before we began, we were talking about how we're both a little nervous about this, the switch of roles. But no, it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. He has his book dropping soon, like 5 days, right?
5 days. June 21st, motherfuckers.
Yeah, important date. It's like bigger than Christmas. This is like the birth of somebody's imagination. So we're going to talk about his book, maybe a little bit about the process and why you should read it. If you're going to read anything, it should be this book. Definitely. I've read parts of it and I can honestly just say that AR is very talented at writing. He's probably actually now one of my favorite authors. Not just saying that. Yeah, it's very imaginative. So get right into it. I guess first tell the people, the lovely listeners of this podcast, why, or tell us about your book. Kind of what's it about? We'll start with the basics.
Well, that's a hard question because just most thing I know because well, it's funny because I actually just got asked that during like my little immigration check-in. They asked me like what I did. I was like, oh, author, and they asked me about the book, and I was like, and immediately they got like a whole bunch of red flags. It's like, oh, really? Do you write a book? Because I was not able to answer the question. I had no idea.
Oh my god,
what to say. Because it's what we talked about in our podcast. It's like if you ask me, the whole thing is about miscommunication. You have two people that basically what I'm looking at is like a psychological look between how they reacted when they first met and how like almost cosmic that connection was. And then you skip to 20 years later and now they're in feuding with one another over, you know, this whole world building aspect that's like layered in between and peppered that kind of really sells and really brings the world to it and kind of changes the normal tropes that you normally would see. So you have the character of Zeiko, who's a very charismatic, just naturally a leader. And you see as because the book is split into two sections, basically, when they were younger, around the ages of 13 and 15, respectively, and then 20 years later when they're 33 and 35, respectively. And the whole dynamic of that is that Zeiko is a natural born leader. Like without even meaning to, when he's younger, you just see it. He has like that charisma. He has like the natural, he leads from the front. He's not just like barking orders to people, but he's doing things and like, you know, kind of instructing people how to like how to keep going. And then you have Jid, who is just extremely philosophical, extremely like compassionate and empathetic, everything that you would want a leader to be, but he just has none of that charisma. He has none of that get up and go to actually do any of those things. So how that plays out when they're younger really blends well together into their friendship. But then when you see that kind of corrupt and you kind of see that, you know, that leadership quality of like maybe wanting to have more power so that you can do more good eventually corrupts because power is corrupting, which is basically the main thing that I'm kind of one of the main things that I try to talk with the story. I mean, it's the book in itself is called Allegory of the End. I meant it as like almost a philosophical work, but like it's supposed to be allegorical because like there's a whole world building aspect in XYZ.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, I read parts of it and it is philosophical. And it is also very fun because you do make your own world. So there's definitely a lot to unpack there, and I want to get into the specifics of your book, but to kind of keep it broad at first, and we'll narrow in. Where did how did all of this inspiration come together? Where did you get it from, and then how did you develop such a dense idea?
Well, I've always said that like a lot of my story just kind of like happened just almost subconsciously from things that happen in my own life. So I would say, you know, one of my best friends that I had, you know, gone to elementary school with, and even though I moved around a lot, we had always remained in communication. We decided to go and be roommates our freshman year of college. And like we hadn't, you know, I had lived in Florida for high school and he had stayed up north. So we thought it was just going to be fine. But then like within like a couple months of just living with one another, it immediately just went to shit. And it was one of those things that, like, from my point of view, it was like at the time I had thought it was just one of those things that you don't know certain qualities about a person until you're like just like, I don't know, I guess it's more things that you glaze over when you're younger and then you don't think are more impactful until you're older, which is again kind of at the point of like I try to make in the book.
Yeah.
And then, you know, flash forward like a couple of years like later, and I'm kind of like thinking about that, and I'm realizing that it wasn't just on my end, but it was also like a communication thing. Like, you know, I also fucked up on my end with that relationship. Like, it was a both ways type of thing. And then a couple months from that, I wake up with like this, like, you know, those dreams that it's like you're not fully asleep, but it was like you kind of, you know, it's like half and half, you know?
Yeah. That weird hate.
Yeah. So I had one of those, and basically the entire plot of the entire like saga played out in like that last little half-hour dream, and it took me about a year to like piece together what all that kind of like meant, and then it took me another year to put that together in a story. But my background is engineering. Like, I think at the time I was like my sophomore junior year of college, so I had no intention of being a writer, none at all. So to me it was more kind of just like a thing, like a fascination. I would think about it when I would wake up, think about it when before going to sleep, like, you know, like when you're just like trying to like count sheep or whatever.
Right.
And progressively it just became more and more. When I would, you know, have smoke sessions with my friends, I would, you know, I'm a class clown, so I'm just like there, like amping up the story, and because I definitely try to make it as humorous as possible. So I would just like, you know, tell them the stories and XYZ, and we would just amp it up and amp it up, and it got to the point that it just, you know, I couldn't just have it in my head anymore and started writing it down.
Yeah, almost like it was already coming out every time you talked, so you might as well just put a pen to paper.
Yeah.
I think too, the Harry Potter, I'm pretty sure that came to J.K. Rowling in a dream. Now she's like the first billionaire author, so it sounds like the right path. Yeah, so you said a few times, like in your book, you try to focus on this theme or that theme. What is or what are the main themes of your books, or this book in particular?
Well, it was something that we talked about before when I was like kind of like asking for help for the blurb, which is, I mean, in itself just like a huge like headache, because like, again, if you really don't know as a writer how to perfectly summarize something, it's even harder to like make like a blurb that like is marketable. But one of the things that we were talking about is that like clones, it actually isn't just something to like bypass, but it's actually kind of like a pretty noteworthy theme. It's like a trope in sci-fi that people kind of like semi-gravitate towards. And I think the reason for it, because it kind of questions life the same way that like a story about AI does. It's like, what is the difference between something, you know, let's say that we have a test tube baby versus me. Can we really consider ourselves different life because I came out of a womb and it came out of a test tube? Or however you know, however your sci-fi, however your story decides to like deal or tackle that issue. So I would definitely say clones are kind of like a big theme for this book. Miscommunication, but again, I think that's more of like an overarching thing. Again, this is volume 1, so I think when you kind of view it as volume 1 and 2 as a whole, I think you'll definitely see the more the miscommunication come up. But I think for this part, it's definitely really at its heart, it's a story about rebellion. Most of my stories are about rebellion. It's really about like a big overarching you know, superpower on one side and then one struggling little fringe on the other side. The thing that I try to make a little different is that as you read, Zako isn't just a dictator. He might come off in a certain way, but like you quickly see it's really just a facade. And like he actually is a lot more like emotional than he gives off, and he really isn't as evil as he seems. Like he actually truly believes in his purpose. He's not doing it. Well, he's not doing it like, you know, he might be doing it subconsciously for like some corrupt evil shit, but like at the time he really thinks he's doing good. Truly.
And what do you hope the readers take away from your book? What do you want them to think about or have lessons to be learned? What do you want the readers to feel when they finish reading your book?
Well, you know what? It's something that we talked about, I mean, on multiple occasions, but really it's just introspection. Like, I can't tell you the amount of things in my life, how differently I view them being younger versus older. I can't even tell you the amount of things that I did when in my 20s that I quite literally cringe, like really deeply cringe about, and only 6 years later. just really think back and like when you have certain emotions, don't just like sit back and like obviously not bottle them, but don't like immediately just like blame outside forces, but like truly think like, why am I feeling these emotions? Am I feeling like such negatively towards something because it really is evil in the universe, or is it because I have some shit that I haven't gotten over? Usually it's the latter.
And I think that's actually really important to, like, going back to your introspection, or people turning inward, and thinking about why they're feeling some certain way, especially in a very, like, our world is very technology based. Your book takes place on a whole nother planet. So like, but it's all the same. That with all this technology, with all these advancements, it's still so important to come back to yourself and understand yourself so that you can act in your environment like appropriately or reasonably. So I think that's really important, especially for like such a YA audience, to hear that they don't need to take everything to the internet or cancel culture or any of that. They just need to be themselves and reflect on themselves. And I think you present that in a really fun way that people don't even realize that they're learning that lesson as we're going through your book.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's a lot different than to like try to aim for something and then actually accomplish it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think we've all taken a 3-point shotter, but how many of us have done it during the buzzer? Know what I mean?
Yeah. So then, okay, going back to your characters and how you're talking about how you cringe so much when you were in your 20s and this, that, like how do you relate to your characters?
How do I relate to my characters? I mean, I am my characters. I mean, to like
but explain yourself in your book.
All right, putting me on the hot seat, god damn it.
Oh,
But
I know.
good. All right, well, really Zako and Jid, if we're being completely honest, are basically versions of myself, and honestly a couple other characters are versions of myself too. I would say Haas as well. When you get to a little bit to know more of that character, Haas is definitely in there as well. But for the most part, all the characters are versions of myself taken to extremes. So Zako is definitely from a time frame that I am trying to evolve from. I'll say the least. And then I guess Jid is more of like the thing I want to strive towards, just being a little more calm and like, thinking about my actions. But at the same point, like if I can be honest, if you ever watched that show Good Places or Good Omens, it's like the one
the place, yeah, where
the
like
Good Place, yeah. So my favorite thing about that show is that they have spoiler alert, my favorite thing about that show is that they have the man, I can't remember the guy's name. It's like the guy with the glasses that's like the
white hair. I don't know his name either. I know who you're talking about though.
Yeah. So my favorite thing about that show is that when they do find out they're in hell, spoiler alert, they find out that you don't just go to hell for doing good things, but you go to hell for also being inactive. So the girl, like the main character, Kristen Stewart, I can't remember her name in the show.
Yeah.
But when she went to hell for being, too self-involved, which is like, obvious what we would assume. But her counterpart went to hell for basically being too passive in life. Like, and the way they describe that, I always love that in the show because like, when they have the devil character explaining it to him, he's basically saying, it's like, yeah, like you think you were being good by being passive, but you actually like blocked a lot of people in your life by being that passive too. Like your indecisiveness also messed with other people the same, like just as negatively as being that asshole that took your spot. Know what I mean?
Right.
And I always thought that was really interesting because, again, like I don't want the book to be looked at as like a complete protagonist versus antagonist. If anything, there are antagonists and protagonists, but those are more in like a thematic, larger scale type of thing. The thing between Zako and Jid is supposed to be perceptive. Like both sides have their good and both sides have their bad, which is again the whole thing. However, like how it kind of relates to me, I guess, because I myself see that while I kind of like can look at one side a little negatively and one a little more positively, they both have the yin and yangs to them. Like
exactly.
Being too much of a Jid is gonna be like I do nothing in life, but being too much of a Zako is like it's just too much. So you got to find like a nice little balance in between things.
And that can be really fun for the readers too, because since it all comes down to perception, a lot like that raises for debate, because people are probably gonna, be like this team or that team, or be like, oh, well, he felt this way because, and I defend him because, and then people can come right back and say that for the other character. So I think that it definitely can relate to your audience in the way that not only is it introspective where people can reflect on their own emotions, but then they're kind of forced to think about the other side as well. So it's a lot of involvement when you're reading a book. It's a lot of mental stimulation, a lot of mental activity. It's not just like watching a TV show where you kind of just get to lay back more and just be entertained. You're actually being involved in the world that you created. But that's my own opinion of that. So I want to ask you, why do you think people should buy your book?
Why do I think people should buy my book? Honestly, without even getting like too crazy about it, it's like the same way I view music. Like, do you want to get like a song of a person that just like pumps some shit out, or a person that like generally put their back, their foot, their like soul into something? I can tell you without a single doubt, no doubt in my voice, I put my entire shit into this book. It has my illustrations that I've like thought over. I can't tell you how look, outside of editing, outside of like all the book stuff that is obvious you have to revise 1,000 times, I've revised the graphics alone at least 30 times each. Wow. Just that. I mean, it's taken me forever to get to this point, and everything that I have lined up, I mean, like I try to time myself perfectly so that like when I start, the ball can just keep rolling, because this saga goes on for a while, trust me. So if you're into that type of shit, if you're into sagas, if you're into sci-fi fantasy, if you're into humor, because believe me, I'm a silly guy. So the book definitely, I definitely try to convey as much as that as possible, as much laughs as possible, a little bit of thinking,
So you said that the illustrations you've changed like 30 times. How much has your book changed since you first started thinking about it to writing it to now the point where you're at now? How much has your book completely altered?
All right. Well, I can tell you, like, in the past 2 to 3 years, not much, but from its original inception, when I thought of it when I was like 18 or so, a lot. So in the very first time, I still had the same concepts, all the same themes, but the way that I achieved those things were way differently. So I was heavily influenced. I mean, the whole thing about the book, just as like to explain the saga, is that everything connects like Lego blocks. It's not just like up and down like Harry Potter 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. Right. For example, the saga is called Death of Order Saga, the Death of Order Saga. Book 1 is Allegory of the End, Volume 1. Book 2 is Iris of Mercy, Part 1. Book 3 is Allegory of the End, Volume 2. Book 4 is Iris of Mercy, Part 2.
Wow.
And then and then that basically serves as the intro, and then that continues on that kind of is the intro. From after that point is when you understand what the Death of Order means. It's kind of like the overarching concept of what everything signifies.
Yeah, there's so much detail there, so much creativity, and like at least one of those books, if not all of them, have to catch the one reader's attention, like at least one. So would you say you have to read those books in order to understand the entire novel, or not? If we want to talk about Death of Order, do you need to read them in order though?
That's a good question. And honestly, to answer the previous question a little bit more,
go ahead.
I kind of bypassed that, but remind me on this question too, because I like that. When I first thought of the book, it was really inspired by like Marvel shit and like comic books. So I can even show you the sketches of it. My first thing was that like their whole philosophical thing of like life and death and like, what is life, that I changed to the whole clone plot now. It used to be a thing that they meet each other the same way that they do in the book, which I'm sure you've gotten to it for like when you get to the end of chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
But then after that, it takes off that like they hear a crime going outside and they go in to respond to it, and they realize that like no one's really paying attention, and then they make like a mech suit. Like they basically become superheroes type of thing. But then it kind of like twist off in like a different way and like XYZ. But it was really more based almost around that comic book plot of like them, like debating about life and death the same way that like Batman does. I mean, I'm
Right.
holding a Batman mug right here. Obviously, it's a huge inspiration. But I guess it took me a couple years in college to realize that like I really wanted something like nuanced, even though it probably is something you've heard like 1,000 times. And I'm sure people when they read the book, it's like, oh, this like that one random book that I read from XYZ. It's called blah blah blah. And of course, I've never heard of it. I'm there looking like a jackass, but
No,
like,
I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that your feelings are invalid, but I don't think that's true. From reading parts of your book and then hearing how you're describing it, I don't think your book is like anything else that's written before. Yeah, you might talk about clones like some other books, but definitely the way that you present it and then the introspection that goes along with it. No, I think it's completely original.
well,
And you
thank
started
you.
for 18. So like you had years and years to only develop it more. It's not like I mean, there's a reason people call like a whodunit murder like a whodunit because it's been done like 1,000 times. So there's literally a title for it. There's nothing like that for your book.
I mean, thank you. I'll leave that to the readers and whatnot. And
There you
I
go.
definitely want to hear their opinions on that. Now, what was the question right after? What was it?
Do you have to read your books in order?
Okay. So that's a really good question because it ties into something I want to talk about anyway. So while, especially when you pick up Allegory of the End, it can almost seem like, because there's a lot, because like it's a lot. It's like like science fiction, like heavy. And not to like the detract anybody, but like it goes in like there's blueprints of the technology in there. It's like like I poured a lot of my engineering passion into that too.
Yeah.
But Iris of Mercy, for example, is completely void of that. It is just fantasy, and it's more like martial arts, if anything, because like what it is, more martial art and like spiritually, because what it is that like I view it as kind of the separation between, I guess, church and state, if you want to think about it, where they have all the scientific data on this book, but then on the other book, it's like they have all the spiritual relations
Right.
to it, and like they dive a little bit deeper into that because the clans and the society developed in that while they exist in the exact same planet, only a couple 100 meters away from one another. It's a completely different life because one is controlled by XYZ, and one is completely not. It's just they're just their own people, nomadic.
Right.
No technology. They just live by the ocean.
And that kind of happens in our own world, like where you see how different.
Amazonian tribes still exist today.
Yeah. Yeah. And like people are so immersed in their own immediate surroundings that they don't think whatever else is happening in the world directly affects them. It's all happening. So yeah, you definitely, I think, yeah, you created like this whole world, the history, the future, like their beliefs. It's just, yeah, I can tell you put your heart and soul into it. So it's very pure. But aside from that, aside from the world building, I asked you a little bit about like your characters, but I know you have a romance part in your book as well. Just to throw that in there, with the science fiction and the fantasy, there is some romance. Like there's a little bit of everything for anybody. So talk about that. Talk about how how your characters are also kind of like humans. Like they're not just, yeah, they live in a different planet, but they're still relatable to us. So to kind of explain that.
Well, it's kind of an interesting little. Well, let me not get it too much into that. I feel like I'll give away a little bit too much there. But I think the romance that you're talking about between Jid and Rhea, I think. I mean, I'm a fan of how it was written. Obviously, I'm pretty biased, but to me, what like true romance is and what like true love is isn't like that like crazy like like every romance picture ever has the picture of like like the guy holding up the girl, like them like biting their lips, and like that's all fantastic. I'm not saying any that's like not, but to me like true like passion is like being able to generally like laugh with a person, or just like those like little nuances of like just knowing that a person like thinks about you when like you're not present there. And just like genuinely caring for a person, not just like saying I love you and like going with emotions, but like genuinely like giving a fuck about another person that's like outside of you. And to me, I try to convey that as much as possible, especially with the Jid character, because while he's brilliant, he is a little emotionally stunted. Like he just like doesn't that's the
Book
reason
I-
why. What did you say?
Nothing. No, it's great.
Okay. So what it was is that like he just like can't convey things in like the way that he should, and it manifests in different ways and whatnot. But like he found this girl that just like bypasses all that, and it's just like, and I like it because when he's older, he's aware of it, and I make it pretty obvious that he knows that he's aware of it when he's older. But when he's younger, he's like completely oblivious to it. Like there's multiple times that I write that he has like a certain emotion, and he's like literally baffled by what the emotion is. He's like, oh yeah, I'm looking at this girl, and like the world was like crashing a couple minutes ago, and now it's kind of fine. I don't know why. Don't know how it's happening. Can't be related to her. That doesn't make any sense.
No, of
But
course not.
I feel a lot better now. And like it's just like that little like inability of like connecting, while just like also like obviously feeling so like impassioned over like another person. It was like something that like I really like that I put in there. But you also have the vice versa of it, where you have Alice and Jid, who are just like they just like they just hit it off immediately, and they're just immediately cracking jokes with one another. And again, it's not like as delicate in their face, things like that, because they meet more when they're younger. But again, it's just one of those things that they just have a like that natural chemistry that I guess you would immediately assume from like a regular relationship.
Right.
Quote unquote regular anyway, because it definitely doesn't end regularly.
Yeah, it sounds like the readers are gonna be growing with these characters.
Yeah, definitely.
They're gonna be knowing them inside and out, and yeah, it's gonna become like family, basically. Like, I mean, I feel like that when when you get so connected to a character, you genuinely like think you know what's like best for them or what they should do. It sounds like that's exactly the impact that your book is going to make on readers. Just the connection. I know your one theme is about miscommunication, but I think definitely the characters are going to connect to the readers because even though it's so personalized to you and your experiences, it sounds like your themes apply to like what everybody goes through, whether it is heartbreak or just growing up and learning from your younger self and then kind of taking a step back and looking at where you are in life. So as complicated or as complex as your book is, I think a lot of simplistic values can be taken from it as well. That's what
yeah, thank you.
Gleaned from it. Yeah, okay. So you mentioned that it was heavy sci-fi, at least for this book that's coming out, but what do you want your readers to know? What do you want to either warn them or like prepare them for or something for when your book comes out? Something that isn't in the blurb of your book or isn't directly in your book.
That's a good one. All right, well, in my blurb, and I don't think, yeah, it definitely doesn't count as spoilers because there's literally a free short story about it right now. You can read it. It's called The Death of Prometheus. It's about the character called, well, his name is kind of weird. It'll kind of get into like that into the book, but for all intents and purposes, he is, excuse me, SGTXC, acronym that stands for synthetically grown transmutation of xenodimensional entity.
God damn.
Yeah, and what all that stands for, and if you think about it, the acronym, if you like spell it out, basically says Sergeant XC, like SGT.XC, which is why there's a miscommunication of what he's called that. So like one side is just getting a communication, so they read that and they read it like it's like a name, but in reality, the people that developed it know it as an acronym. So there's like a miscommunication on like what they call it. Understand?
Yeah.
So as that progresses, you understand what it is more is all the technology. And this actually really like inspired from like Roswell, like our current like situation. It's like that the whole conspiracy that like the microchip era, that whole like huge bump in development and computing all came from the Roswell crash. You can imagine that XC is basically this planet's version of Roswell. He crash landed on the planet hundreds of years prior to the start of the story. And when the government at the time started like finding and like exploring more of the planet, and they found this body, all the technology from the book actually derives from it. So the jump pads, the teleportation devices, the relay technology, which is like an artificial technology, which plays a huge role into the book, not only from world building aspect, but thematically too, because it's like if you're controlling what people see, what is reality? That's kind of like the whole gist there. Right. And then countless of other things all are derived from this being. And the way that it all comes together, like, I mean, the reason the short story is called Death of Prometheus is because Prometheus was the god that brought down fire to humans, and for it, he was cast up out of Olympus by Zeus and was forced to have a hawk, the symbol of Zeus, eat his pancreas every single day for eternity. So
there's what goes on in your mind, like it's really baffling.
Well, and I know. And as it progresses and all that like happens, you realize that basically that is what Sergeant XC is. He is this version of Prometheus. So he brought down all these like technologies to the world, and for that, he got reanimated into like this like death fighting machine for Zako's Legion, just because Zako was paranoid. Like, wow. He was like, oh, well, I need something to like, really scare some motherfuckers. So we need to go ahead and resurrect that. And he had the power to do so, so he did it. And obviously it wasn't just a quick snap. It took a lot of, I'd recommend reading that short story, honestly.
Yeah, there you go. I think that would, yeah, you have like everything for like super fans, illustrations, these backstories, the whole shebang. I mean, there's so much out there. And like I said before, there's something out there for anybody to enjoy any part of your book. So if you guys liked anything that we talked about, there's no reason that you shouldn't support this author and pick up his book, or at least look at his freaking artwork. Like, I've seen it and it's actually bizarre. But I think that's all the time we have time for right now. We have another interview for you with more people because everybody's excited about your book. So thank you. Next episode we'll just be deeper into that. So thank you for letting me host your podcast. I hope I did it justice.
No, you definitely, and honestly, thank you so much. For anybody that is not in the aware, this is Carolyn Posh. She has a book coming out, Inside and Out.
Yeah, but this is about you. I don't know why you're trying to turn it on me.
Well, all right. You know what? I'm trying to promote everybody. It's natural. What do you want? I get uncomfortable talking about myself.
Just flip right back in. That's
but again, thank you so much. So I'll let you tag us out.
All right. Allegory at the end, 5 days, June 21st, correct?
Yes, June 21st. Yeah.
June 21st. That's it. That's all you need to know. Allegory of the oh my God, I can't talk. That's how excited I am. Anybody listening, all you need to know, June 21st, Allegory of the End. Buy it through your website, which you can get to on your Instagram, through A.R. Mirabal. Through your website, will it be on Amazon?
Yep, Amazon website is neotino.net. Instagram is @Allegory of the End. But you can also look it up by A.R. Mirabal.
Yes. Yeah. Do that. If you're listening to this podcast, you have an obligation to go do that.
Do that shit.
On that note.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Peace out.